My husband's new driver arrived on a rainy Monday morning. He was polite, reserved, and, I noticed immediately, strikingly handsome. He introduced himself as Alex, and his eyes met mine with a confidence that made my heart skip a beat. I wasn't used to feeling like this, not after years of marriage, but something about him, it unnerved me and thrilled me at the same time. When he turned to shake my hand, his touch lingered for just a second too long. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I imagined it. Either way, I found myself retreating to the kitchen, my cheeks flushed, gripping the counter to steady myself. It was just a handshake, nothing more. But later that day, as I watched him from the window helping my husband into the car, I couldn't shake the image of his strong hands, the way they moved with purpose, the easy grace of his movements. I told myself to stop. This was ridiculous. 2 days later, my husband was away on a business trip. I stayed home, as I always did, busying myself with chores that seemed endless. Around midday, the sound of the front door opening startled me. Alex was there, standing in the entryway, holding a package he said had just been delivered. I didn't want it to get wet in the rain, he explained, setting the box on the table. His voice was deep, smooth, and it sent an inexplicable shiver down my spine. "Thank you," I managed, avoiding his gaze. But when I glanced up, he was staring at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the air between us felt charged, electric, and then he smiled, breaking the tension, or maybe just heightening it. "If you ever need anything while your husband is away, you can call me," he said. There was an edge to his voice, something almost suggestive. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The days that followed were unbearable. I felt trapped in my own thoughts, replaying every interaction we'd had, scrutinizing his every word, every glance. It was madness. And yet, I couldn't stop. On Friday, I found myself in the driveway, struggling to lift a heavy box out of my car. Alex appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his presence commanding, his smile disarming. "Let me help you with that," he said, his hands brushing against mine as he took the box. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me. I stepped back, trying to compose myself as he carried the box inside. "You're always so kind," I said awkwardly. He set the box down and turned to face me. "I like being helpful," he said, his voice low. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, it felt like he could see right through me, see the thoughts I'd been trying so desperately to suppress. I should go," I stammered, retreating toward the door. But before I could reach it, he stepped closer, his hand gently catching my wrist. I froze, my breath hitching as he leaned in. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I couldn't. My words betrayed me, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his gaze. The next moment unfolded in a blur of intensity. The world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of us, the sound of my heartbeat roaring in my ears. He kissed me, and it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was raw, passionate, and completely overwhelming. Every rational thought disappeared as I surrendered to the moment, to him. When we finally pulled away, reality crashed back in. "This can't happen again," I said, my voice trembling. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were a lie. The pull between us was too strong, too consuming. The following days were a whirlwind of stolen glances, whispered words, and moments that felt impossibly charged. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was risking everything. But I couldn't stop. Being around him was intoxicating, and every interaction left me craving more. One evening, my husband called to say he'd be home late. Alex was still at the house, waiting for instructions on when to pick him up. I found myself in the living room, pretending to read, but my focus was entirely on the man just a few feet away. "You seem distracted," he said, breaking the silence. I looked up, startled, and found him watching me, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine," I lied, but he didn't believe me. He crossed the room, his movements deliberate, and stopped just short of where I sat. "Are you?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes locked on mine. I couldn't answer. The air between us felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and unfulfilled desires. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and it was all I could do to keep breathing. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But even as I said it, I knew it was futile. The lines had already been crossed, the boundaries blurred beyond recognition. Alex leaned closer, his lips just inches from mine. "Then tell me to leave," he said. But I couldn't. I didn't want him to. The night that followed was a tangle of emotions: guilt, desire, exhilaration, and fear. I knew we were playing with fire, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Being with him was worth the risk, worth the consequences. But the next morning, reality came crashing down. My husband returned home earlier than expected, and the weight of what I'd done settled heavily on my shoulders. Alex was professional, as always, showing no sign of the turmoil that had unfolded between us, but I couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too, the tension, the guilt, the impossibility of our situation. Days turned into weeks, and though we tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, the undercurrent of tension between us remained. Every interaction felt like a test, every glance a reminder of what we'd shared. I knew it couldn't last. Something had to give. And then, one evening, it did. My husband found a note. A careless mistake. A fragment of a memory I'd tried so hard to forget. His questions were relentless, his accusations cutting. I denied everything, but the damage was done. The trust we'd built over years of marriage was shattered, and there was no piecing it back together. Alex was gone the next day, dismissed without explanation. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that would never be the same. The silence in the house was deafening, a constant reminder of the choices I'd made and the consequences that followed. Even now, I can still feel his touch, hear his voice, see the way he looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. And I wonder, was it worth it? Was the brief, intense connection we shared worth the destruction it left in its wake? I don't have an answer. Maybe I never will. All I know is that some moments are too powerful, too consuming to be denied, and some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed.